Welcome to the DFO Fantasy Show Team Preview Series. I'm managing fantasy editor of Daily Faceoff.com, Brock Seguin, and today we will be covering the Colorado Avalanche. The Avalanche have finished with 100-plus points in 4 consecutive seasons, and during that time, they have the second best points percentage and are the second highest scoring team in the NHL. The sportsbooks expect that run to continue in 2025-26 as the Avalanche are projected to finish with 105.5 points, the 6th best record in the NHL and the 4th best record in the Western Conference. The Avalanche are loaded with quality fantasy talent. According to Yahoo's ADPs, they have 4 players going in the top 50 and 8 players going in the top 150. So we have a lot of ground to cover today. Let's start with the forwards and the current number 2 overall fantasy pick, Nathan MacKinnon. In the DFO consensus top 300, MacKinnon ranks 2nd overall, but is ranked anywhere from 1st to 3rd by our analysts. There's certainly a case for him going 1st overall ahead of Connor McDavid. He's been better in each of the last 2 seasons, and in the DFO projections, he ranks 3rd in points, 9th in goals, 4th in power play points, and 1st in shots on goal. And when you look solely at the projections in the DFO customizable rankings tool, if you plug in standard Yahoo point scoring, MacKinnon grades out as the best player overall. We talked about it on the DFO show Centers Preview the other day. I'd almost rather have the number 2 overall pick so I don't have to decide between MacKinnon or McDavid. Next is Martin Necas, who was excellent in his 30 games with the Avalanche following last year's trade. And don't get me wrong, he was obviously very good with the Hurricanes as well, but he had 11 goals and 17 assists for 28 points in 30 games with the Avalanche and saw a dramatic increase in ice time. He went from 18:05 in Carolina to 20 minutes and 30 seconds per game in Colorado. When you couple with what we saw from him last season with the fact that he's in a contract year this year, we have all the ingredients for a career year for Martin Necas. With an ADP of 50.5, Necas is looking like a great value right now. Not a single DFO analyst has him ranked lower than 47th, and he has a consensus ranking of 32nd, a round and a half earlier than his current ADP. So I love me some Martin Necas this year. Things get a little bit trickier as you move down the depth chart here and get into the 8th round where you have both Valeri Nichushkin and Brock Nelson coming off the board. Nichushkin obviously has the talent to be an 8th round fantasy pick. He's averaged 35 goals and 37 assists per 82 games over the last 4 seasons. The problem? He's missed 35% of the games during that time. So when he's in the lineup, he's great, but he hasn't played more than 65 games since 2016. If you could guarantee me he was going to play 82 games, he'd easily be a top 50 fantasy pick for me, but the likelihood of that happening seems extremely low. With that said, I would rather draft Nichushkin at 89 than Brock Nelson at 90th overall. Nelson's ice time dropped dramatically to 17 minutes 30 seconds after his trade to Colorado, and he scored at a 26-goal, 30-assist pace, and both his personal shooting percentage and his on-ice shooting percentage suggest that he was even lucky to get to those marks. There's absolutely no reason to be taking a strict center in Nelson in the 8th round when you can get somebody like Mika Zibanejad 60 picks later. The last 2 draftable forwards in Colorado are Gabriel Landeskog and Arturi Lehkonen. It's hard to know exactly what you're going to get out of Landeskog after so much time off, but he looked really good in his brief playoff stint last season. Luckily, he's going in the 14th round in fantasy right now, so he's a low-risk, high-reward selection. It was a long time ago, but in his last 3 full NHL seasons, Landeskog averaged 36 goals and 43 assists per 82 games. Even if he's 75% of that player, he could still score 25-plus goals with 30-plus assists this season. Lehkonen can also be a serviceable pick at the end of your draft. He set a career high with 27 goals last season and has averaged nearly 30 goals per 82 games during his time with the Avalanche. Unfortunately, like Nichushkin, he's had a very difficult time staying healthy, but he's still a cheap exposure pick to MacKinnon that could be a solid sleeper pick if he ends up playing close to 82 games this season. On the blue line, Cale Makar is currently the number 1 defenseman and the number 5 overall pick off the board with an ADP of 5.5. After a couple of injury-plagued seasons to begin his career, Makar has played in 96% of the games over the last 2 seasons and has scored 14 more goals and 14 more points than the second-ranked defenseman in both of those categories. He's either first or second among defensemen in basically every single standard fantasy category, and he's an obvious no-brainer as the number 1 defenseman off the board. The question really becomes, how early do you take a defenseman? I personally have him ranked at number 8 behind McDavid, MacKinnon, Kucherov, Draisaitl, Pastrnak, and Kaprizov. I just prefer those elite wingers a little bit more than taking Makar 5th overall, but later in the first round, absolutely no-brainer pick. Now, Makar's D partner, Devon Toews, usually goes too early in fantasy for a player that will basically never touch PP1 outside of a few seconds here and there. But his ADP of 138 this season is actually quite appealing. I've basically never drafted Toews because he usually goes around like the 90th pick. But at 138, that's perfectly well within the range of outcomes for him this year. He can certainly play up to that standard. He's scored double-digit goals in 3 of the last 4 seasons while averaging 40 assists and a league best plus 37 rating during those seasons. The offensive numbers are impressive when you consider the fact that he averages only 7 power play points per season. He just gets the job done at 5v5, and if your league counts plus minus, he's as good as it gets in that category. He is a low-end number 3, high-end number fantasy blue liner for me, and he's going right around that spot. Going around the same spot in drafts right now is Brent Burns, who signed with the Avalanche this summer. At age 40, it's hard to know exactly how much is left in the tank for Burns, but he still played nearly 21 minutes per game last season with the Hurricanes and had some bad luck in his personal shooting percentage and his on-ice shooting percentage. Like Toews, most of his production is going to have to come at 5v5. He's not taking over the power play 1 quarterback from Makar, so his ceiling is somewhat capped. But even when you look at last year's kind of poor results, I still think there's the possibility of him being a 10-goal scorer and 30-assist player this year. But at this point, with where they're going, I'd much prefer Toews only a few spots ahead in ADP. And now with the goalies, drafting an Avalanche goalie will feel much better this year than it did last year. A season ago, we were basically reluctantly clicking on Alexander Georgiev simply because he was the Avalanche goalie, while Mackenzie Blackwood gave you a legitimate reason to want to click his name this year, going 22-12-3 with a 233 goals against average and a 913 save percentage with 3 shutouts after being acquired by the Avalanche. He's going to cost you an early 3rd-round pick, so it will depend on how comfortable you are in drafting a goalie early or your draft strategy on whether or not you want to take a goalie that early. The thing that's interesting is where he's going right now. You can basically start your draft with Nathan MacKinnon, somebody in the 2nd round, call it whoever, and then get Blackwood in the 3rd round. And basically, if McKinnon has a good day, the Avs are probably winning. You're probably getting a win with Blackwood. It's kind of an interesting spot in where he's going. You can kind of stack up McKinnon and Blackwood, but he's going to be in the mix to lead the NHL in wins, and he was top 10 in both goals against average and save percentage last season. So I absolutely love me some Mackenzie Blackwood. It just depends on how early you're willing to draft a goalie. I'm now joined by Aarif Deen of Colorado Hockey Now. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the kind of the depths of the fantasy hockey Colorado Avalanche, I want to just know what player you think from this Avalanche roster is due for a breakout in 2025-26.
So I'm going to go out on a limb with this one, and I'm kind of hitching my wagon to somebody who has had some issues both physically and off the ice over the last couple of years, but I'm going to say Val Nichushkin, and I'm going to do that for a couple reasons. Number one, if you look at Val's stats, obviously since the Avalanche won the Stanley Cup, which the Cup year was his breakout year, but since they've won the Cup, he's been roughly around 50 games. He's missed games because of injury. He's missed games because of suspensions. The Avalanche are hoping that this is the first time since 2022 where we don't have to talk about a Val suspension. It's more on the ice performance, maybe an injury here or there. But with the absence of Mikko Rantanen and with him no longer in the fold, you look at what Val's done over the last couple of years, 28 goals in 54 games and then 21 goals in 43 games. You put that together, he's got 49 goals in his last 97 regular season games. So ultimately, he's a half a goal per game pace. And when you lose a Mikko Rantanen, when you replace him with someone like Natchez, who's still going to give you points, but he's not going to give you 50, 55 goals like Mikko did a couple of years ago, Val's the ideal guy that, I know he's going to start on that second line, but I can see him working his way up to that first line with Nathan MacKinnon, where he was with him and Mikko back in 2024. And, if he plays 70 games, like he'll give you 35 goals. If he plays 80 games, he might give you 40 goals. He might give you 45 if McKinnon's really more into being a playmaker than a scorer, which he kind of decides any given year which one he wants. But without Mikko Rantanen, with Val Nichushkin, hopefully having that suspension and the off-ice issues and struggles behind him, if the guy can be healthy, if he can play 70, 80 games, which he honestly has, ultimately he's never done with the Avalanche. In 2020, he played 65 games out of, I think it was 67 in that COVID year. If he can give you close to a full year, that's a guy 30 years old, right in his prime, that I think we should be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I've been a big Nichushkin fan for a few years now, and it's always leaves you wanting a little bit
Yeah.
more just because of the lack of games played. But after the Rantanen trade, after he returned to the lineup last year, 22 games to close out the season, finished on a 37 goal pace. So
Mhm.
definitely a guy that, if healthy, can certainly flirt with 40 goals. Let's stick with Nichushkin for a second here, because if you had to pick a player out of, let's say, Lehkonen, Nelson, and Nichushkin to score the most goals, who would it be? Like you said, Lehkonen might be the guy that plays most of the ice time with McKinnon, maybe even just earlier in the season. Nelson's a guy that's averaged 35 goals over the last 4 seasons. Nichushkin's been right around that same average, just without the necessary games played to kind of get there. If you had to pick one, would it be Nichushkin?
I think so. I think Nichushkin's the one that's going to give you the most goals. Brock Nelson, I'm really interested to know where he's going to be. Obviously, 80 games last year, 26 goals between the Avs and the Islanders. I can see him hovering around the 30 mark. Lehkonen has gotten close to 30 a couple times. I don't believe he's eclipsed that mark. And Val obviously is a guy that has scored at that pace and constantly plays at that level. I know last year you said it was a 37 goal pace after he came back. That includes, he had a little bit of like a dry spell late in the regular season and obviously heading into the playoffs or something like that, if I remember correctly. So this is a guy that I think is like, he's best suited as a goal scorer. He's best suited in front of the net, chipping away at the puck and playing with Nathan McKinnon, and maybe Marty Necas is on the other wing, who's a guy who's also a playmaker, also a shifty player. Val's going to get in the dirty areas. He's going to do what Mark Stone does for the Vegas Golden Knights, and I think he's the one that I would pick. Honestly, he might have the most goals from the top 6, and again, that depends on Nathan McKinnon. McKinnon some years decides he wants to be a 50 goal guy. Some years decides he wants to be a 90 assist guy. So it just kind of depends which way he shifts toward this year.
It might be. It must be fun to have that kind of flexibility.
Yeah.
And just to your point, only 2 goals in his final 9 games for Val Nichushkin. And Nelson is such an interesting player because he was kind of like so consistent during his time with the Islanders, and then got off to that bit of a slow start with the Avs, finished the season a little bit stronger, 12 points in his final 15 games. Let's get to one of the most interesting storylines entering 25-26 for the Avs, and that's Gabriel Landeskog.
Yeah.
First full season since 2022. He looks good in the few playoff games that we saw before they were eliminated. We currently have him projected at 17 goals, 30 assists in 72 games. Would you take the over or under on that mark? And then just what are your thoughts here on Landeskog entering this season?
So I have been an optimist on the Landeskog wagon for a few years, and I'm going to continue that. I don't know if I'll take the over-under or under on 72 games, and it can go either way, but I do think I'll take the over on the 47 points. Like, I can see him putting up 49 points in 65 games, for example, like if it comes to that. The thing with Gabe is, people talk about, for example, Jonathan Toews, someone who's been out of the game for a few years, wants to work his way back in. The Avs tried to sign him, actually, but I'm really curious to see, for example, with Toews, what being away from the game for 3 years and now being healthy can do. Now, the difference between someone like that and Gabe Landeskog is Gabe didn't leave the game. He did not retire. He did not go. He was at the rink every day. If he wasn't at the rink, he was somewhere in Sweden, somewhere in God knows where. If you watch the documentary, he went everywhere to fix this dang knee of his. But he was always keeping himself in game shape. He never took a break from, I'm a professional hockey player. So that always made me like the mentality I've had every year. And if you and I were doing this interview 12 months ago, I would have told you, if Gabe can figure out the knee, if he can find a way to be that groundbreaking player with this surgery, with this injury, I think he'll be back to being Gabe Landeskog. Because at 32 years old, he's still in his prime. He's still, maybe he's at the tail end of it, but he's still the guy that we saw pre-injury, that I think it was 30 goals in 58 games before he was injured in 2022. Like, before he
30 and 51 games.
30 and 51, even better. Like, that's a heck of a goal scoring pace. So when I see numbers like that, and when I see what he did in the playoffs, I see a guy that might have figured out how to handle this injury. Is he going to be perfect? But probably not. He might have to do a lot more recovery stuff. But think Patrick Kane. Patrick Kane, before he signed with the Red Wings, was like, well, if he gets the hip under control, what kind of Kane are we going to get? And we're still getting 60, 70 point, almost 40-year-old Kane. So I can see Landeskog being the same thing in terms of, as long as the knee's not holding him back, which in the playoffs, it didn't look like it was. Like he looked, and the fact that he played 4 of those games, I believe in 7 or 8 nights, uh, without pause, ice time constantly increasing, roll constantly increasing, makes me feel like, obviously if somebody hits him knee on knee and he tears an ACL, that's a different story. But it makes me feel like he's got the knee under control. And if he's got the knee under control, it would not surprise me if it takes him a season to kind of get back to where he was, but I do genuinely, like in the heart of hearts, believe there is a 70-point Landeskog, 80-point Landeskog even over the next 4 or 5 years that we're going to see again, whether it's this season, the season after. So mark me down as someone who thinks he's going to get more than 47 points, because what we've seen from the Avalanche, especially in the playoffs, is, oh, you're a third liner? No, you're on the second line. You're on the first power play unit. He's going to get those minutes. We've mentioned every part of the Avalanche's top 6 today, and it's a deep core. It's a team that he's going to play a lot of minutes with. And if you know anything about Jared Bednar, is he doesn't have a first line and a second line. He has a first line center named Nathan McKinnon, a second line center named Brock Nelson, which used to be Kadri, and his wingers, they go up and down. He plays them wherever the heck he wants. So Landy will play with Nate. Val will play with Nate at some point. Like you said, it'll probably be Lehkonen and Natchez that start with him. So put me in as someone who believes he'll get over 40. You said 47. I think he'll get over 47 points. 72 games, we'll see.
Yeah, that's the one thing, like you mentioned it, just seeing the ice time climb, 1817, then 1936, then 2020, in those last 3 playoff games, seeing that consistently climb, to me, makes it feel like he's healthy, and it's just a matter of time, right? Hasn't played over 54 games since 2019, but in his previous 3 seasons, averaged 79.9 points over 82 games. So near point per game player when he's on the ice, just needs to stay healthy, and what a comeback story it will be. Final question for you here is just, what do you expect from Mackenzie Blackwood this season? He's a very difficult goalie to project because upon his arrival in Colorado last season, he was unbelievable. He had a .938 save percentage in his first 12 games. He was great. After that, though, just a .901 save percentage in his final 25 games. Wasn't particularly sharp in the playoffs at times. So just like kind of twofold question, like how much work do we end up seeing Blackwood start this year, and just what kind of goalie is he going to be? Is he going to be closer to that goalie we saw in the first 12 games, maybe a little bit closer to the goalie we saw at the end of the year, or maybe somewhere in between?
I think somewhere in between. I mean, I think back to guys like Philip Grubauer and guys like Darcy Kemper, and that's all you need from him. And ultimately, I think he can give you that. But the difference between him and someone like Grubauer, someone like Kemper is, he's got that potential. He's got that young goalie who's come up through the Canadian system, who everybody talked about 5-6 years ago pre-COVID was like, this might be the next Team Canada starter. And I think if you combine all of that together with like the maturity of the player now, there's a writer here in Denver who covered him in New Jersey years ago and now covers him here and always talks about how different of a player he is, how different of a person he is, how he was a goofier, kid in New Jersey and how much more mature and how much more kind of veteran like he is now. This is his first real opportunity. When he came in last year, it was to stop the bleeding, and Scott Wedgwood came in first to stop the bleeding, and then Blackwood came in and stopped even more of it. And I think now with a full year, with a full training camp, with all of these things under his belt with Colorado, I look at Darcy Kemper's numbers in 2022, and I believe Kemper was around a .920 save percentage. He had 37 wins, and I could see that being the case. I could see him being the kind of player. Yeah, I could see him being the kind of player where he might not become a Vezina Trophy finalist, but that might be because people are going to say, well, he's playing behind the Avalanche system, and that's fine. If he can be the Corey Crawford or the Chris Osgood of the early Red Wings, like that's all this team needs. But the difference between him and, again, Kemper, who came in on the last year of his deal and at an older age, or Grubauer, is he seems like the guy that can do it more consistently. He seems like the guy that can give you what Corey Crawford gave Chicago, where we never talked much about Corey Crawford, but you look back at it now and you're like, you know what? He was solid, and we've seen what a bad goalie can do to a team. We saw it with Georgiev last year. What Crawford did is all you need when you have a team like this.
Yeah, and goaltending, we often talk about from a fantasy perspective, is more of a team-related position than it is an individual-related position. And obviously, Blackwood is among the, on one of the best teams in the league. And the one thing that I always just say when I watch him is he's just a monster. He's so big and he takes up so much of the net. And yeah, he just needs to be above average and this team will go very deep. If you just really quickly, last thought here, if you had to handicap how many starts he's going to see this year, what would you say? Like last year, he started 53 between San Jose and Colorado. Do you think it's going to be kind of like a 70-30 split between him and Wedgwood this year?
I can see Wedgwood getting around 25 starts. So I would say Blackwood will pass the 53, but I don't think he'll hit 60. And that's just because like Wedgwood is such a wonderful backup. He gives you what Pavel Francouz gave you in 2022, a guy that you can kind of rely on. So I can see around that 55 to 59 mark for Blackwood and the rest for Wedgwood, assuming obviously Blackwood doesn't have any injuries, which thankfully last year he did not.
Excellent, Aarif. Thank you so much for joining me today, and best of luck covering the Avs this season.
Of course. Thanks again for having me on.
Thanks for watching this video. If you want more great fantasy hockey and betting content from myself, Carter Hutton, Matthew Barnaby, and the rest of the DFO analysts, make sure you subscribe to the DFO Fantasy and Betting YouTube channel today and never miss a minute.